There is, of course, lots of positives that come from having an overlapping fullback, their ability to support the winger, make overlapping runs, and then cross the ball and deliver, as well as affecting the dynamic and giving a different dynamic to the attacking routine of a team. That being said, they can often be isolated in wide areas 1v1 where they're not as natural in that position compared to a winger, and there's also a lot of larger, highly taxing distances for those players to be able to cover. The usage of inverted fullbacks also offers a different set of its own positives and negatives. Whilst moving the fullback inside rather than overlapping doesn't provide the same level of support for the winger with those overlapping or underlapping runs, it does provide that extra stability in the middle of the pitch, allowing the central midfielder to actually move forward into the half space. This also shortens the distances that the players have to move to get back into their original positions, as opposed to an overlapping fullback who is often surpassing a winger and then having to track back so far, which often brings that extra running capacity. Okay, now onto the tactics board. We're going to talk about the inverted fullbacks, the overlapping fullbacks, and the different ways of using them, and why the overlapping fullbacks would give us such a big issue right now. So it's important to say, obviously, as we've said earlier in this video in the intro, the difference between overlapping fullbacks and inverting fullbacks, and again, overlapping or underlapping fullbacks to provide support for the wingers, there's different usages for all of them. And it's realistically, it comes back to something that I spoke about earlier on in the season, which is in the current sort of meta of tactics, fullbacks are so important because they are almost seen as the team's platformers. They are essentially there to aid the rest of the team in the sense of they are your balancers. So let's start off by doing what we've been doing lately. Let's put it into a shape of, let's say Enzo goes into the half space here. Casado, Reece James, for example, goes inside, and we form that 3-2-5 in this manner with an inverted fullback in here. Now, instantly, you have 5 players in here. Let me use this. 5 players here that are all comfortable defenders, and that is giving you a little bit more protection. These two are better stepping forward and sort of winning duels. They're more defensively sound, and they give you a little bit more physicality in the middle of the pitch, as compared to an Enzo, who, again, in here, we're going to speak about in a minute. At points last season, people sort of made the complaint that Enzo was too lightweight in that area, and that we used to look really, really open in midfield. And the reason that was because we used to play so expansive. And now let's change it, right? So let's say Palmer was on the right. He was drifting inside, and it was James, or say Gusto, but we'll put James in for now, creating this area. Let's say that then means Nkunku can play in the 10. Let's say Jackson was fit. Where's Jackson? And let's say it's something like this. Okay, so you have your pocket play is much better. You have to admit, yes, you have a more technical player in there. You have players that can combine with the striker. That is, of course, a positive that comes from it. The negatives, however, is firstly, when that ball breaks, these two, you've got 2 players that are not the best at counter-pressing quickly in these areas to win the ball back. But you've also got 2 players that they're not going to bust a gut, because they're more your luxury players, these 2 number 10s. They're not going to bust a gut to get back and work hard. Not to say Enzo is like the hardest working player ever, but especially in recent times, he's been making an effort from this area to at least he duels well. He's putting a shift in from this role. However, that then means that because of that, James is out of position up here. So now you've got 2 midfielders, and let's even put it like this, right? Because that's probably more likely. Casado is now the first sort of line of pressure. If that ball breaks, he has to put pressure on the ball here. James is out of position. He's going to have to try and retreat. If they skip past Casado in this scenario, Chelsea are then left with this shape. And this is what led to so much sort of angst last season, is this role. In an ideal world, your counter press is better set for them to do this together. But because, like I said, with Palmer, it's not like his first instinct. This then means that if there's even a slight disconnect, Palmer's slightly off it, he's not pressing off the ball, Casado's gone to the ball and they get round him, then Chelsea are in trouble. The difference with an inverted fullback is, where do we go? Let's just go. let's just put on Cuckoo here just for now. Forget the players. Think more about the forget like the players in the forward line. Think more about the shape. If the ball breaks here, you have this player is a winger out of position. So technically, what you have is 5 defensive-minded players, better personnel than someone like Enzo, more physical in this spot, and less likely, because something Enzo does a lot in here is he jumps quickly because he's not as experienced in that role. So that can then often leave a sea of space in behind. But something that James and Casado as a pair would do a little bit better, and even if, again, say it was Kukurea on this side, invert him. Let's just do this again. Forget the personnel in that sense. But if this was Kukurea and Casado jumps to cover this space quickly, Kukurea is again they're so in tandem, and you've got a more defensive-minded player that this all shifts slightly easier. And because they are better defenders, they will naturally hold the play for longer. They will slow opposition transitions down quicker to the point where these guys can actually recover. And once those guys do recover, you're back in shape and you are ready to defend properly. That is the main issue that comes from overlapping a fullback in terms of out of possession. I don't like the counter press when we overlap a fullback. I think it's far worse. I think it's harder to sustain attacks due to that. And I think we're more open. I think it's easier to beat our counter press and actually get high value shots or chances away against Chelsea when we play an overlapping fullback versus an inverted fullback, having a more defensive and resolute, physical-minded player in the middle of the pitch. Now, where this becomes different is when you had, say, a Lavia, because what then could be done is, and again, this isn't, and I know that we didn't play an overlapping fullback in this sense, but what we did do with the fullback is move them on higher, because a lot of people are saying, what's the difference if we're moving the fullback into the 10? Now, let's just move it like this for now. Let's say Lavia comes in, Enzo goes out, and we're having this sort of shape, okay? Not as strong in the pockets, as we said, but you've still got that quality out wide. Kukurea, he does offer, more than anybody else has so far from this number 10 position, very good supportive runs, both inside and outside, to support his player. That's been done in that 10. I like that when he's been in there. But it also means that, as I said, Kukurea will work his socks off to get back from this position, which is a counter-pressing positive. But also, the strength and physicality that you have in here is far superior. You look at the Villa game where we won 3-0, and people look at that and think the wing pairing, to be fair, probably wasn't ideal because you had Sancho and you had Neto as your wing pairing, which I have said I have issues with at points this season. But what Chelsea did have in this game was, because it was Enzo here, Casado was inverting from here, is you had a really strong base. You had Enzo, who was working back at times. You had ridiculous technical efficiency in the middle of the park, and it all worked out. And if this was the case with Lavia, if we had Lavia right now, and results had been this poor throughout this last 10 games, and all the same struggles that we're having now had been the same with Lavia in the team, then I would say, okay, maybe it is worth, let's go Palmer onto the right. Let's have him shift inside and let's play Gusto out here. Because then we're still going to have this positive base of the 5. You're still going to have that extra defensive stability coming backwards. What people need to realise is we're not a defensively resolute team as it is. So if you want to then start going for these sort of other ways of doing things, the one thing, even though we've not been defensively unbelievable this season, the extra control that we've sort of had in games, it has made it that the games are not becoming so chaotic that they swing highly one way or the other. Most games are close, and that's a sign of at least more stability in a game. The difference and what needs to get better is the execution to not make huge mistakes that put us at a disadvantage when we don't need to be. Like, we're putting ourselves under the cosh. Controlling tempo a little bit better. Again, I've made a whole video, so there's other issues within this, what's been happening recently. Go check out my recent video for that, because it's the 5 things that are going wrong for Maresca at Chelsea right now. But you still gain with this the 5. And it's all about, people say like the balanced way of controlling football, 5 here, 5 here. But it's not just about numbers, because like I said earlier, if you make that Enzo, yes, it's 5 and 5. Let's just say Nkunku. But now the personnel is, the balance is off. You've got low physicality in here with Enzo. You've got 2 number 10s that aren't going to really work back and do their bit. You've got Gusto heavily out of position in compared to, and this is another thing that people don't realise in terms of distances, with the wingers who are going to often sort of arrive in the last line more as a 3 in the last line. Like, people sort of act like the 5 is like this when it often isn't. Yes, these players are meant to make these runs into here, but if you look at when like we have like a sort of an inverted fullback in the middle of the park in this area, often it will look more like this, because you're trying to make those zigzag shapes, because you're trying to pull out a defender in here and a defender in here to make space in that spot in behind, if that makes sense. So what that then does mean is Gusto is naturally, like, people, like, he's got a long way to travel here to get back into position without affecting the ball. Because say the ball's in the middle and he can't sort of get to there because there's another player here that's their job to do. Say this is the other way around. Like I say, the ball breaks here, that's Palmer's job, but he's less likely to do that than a Gusto in here. And he's also less likely to track. But put this the other way around, like this, sorry. Like I say, Gusto is now going to be running back to get into position without affecting the ball. I've just realised that this is without Cucurella on the pitch, but you get the gist. Where did I put Cucurella? Like this. He's running to get back into this position without pressing infield to affect the ball. So he's going to try and get back to here. But Palmer's not going to be as efficient, and it's going to take longer. You're not slowing the ball here to allow Gusto that time to get into there, because the personnel in here isn't correct. The balance isn't on. And this is a squad building issue, because, again, you've got too many players in this team that need to be platformed for already. And I love Enzo Fernandez, and I think he's worth platforming the team for, which is why I like inverted fullbacks. I think if you look at last season, even when he wasn't in the team, the reason that Chelsea got so much more solid towards the back end was when Cucurella was brought into the middle of the pitch and provided that base. And then you had Gallagher, let's just say Nkunku's Gallagher in this instance, who did the Enzo role, who's doing both. He can drop in, he can collect the ball, he can play out, he can also attack the last line, and he can do both, being a positive. He can be the +1 on both ends, which again might be suited to a different player, a more physical player in certain games. It depends on the personnel of the matchup, right? Because football is very much a game of matchups as well. Are you physically matched up to your opposition? Are you tactically matched up to your opposition? It's one of those things. To give a visual representation of this, you can see Gusto is overlapping Palmer, and you've got 2 midfielders in the middle of the park with Enzo Fernandez next to Caicedo. But as you can see, Enzo Fernandez is isolated with a lot of space to defend behind him. So if Manchester United do break that press and the ball is turned over, they will have an overload on the counter-attack, which Chelsea aren't prepared to defend against. Compare that to Pochettino's tweak with Cucurella in the middle of the park as an inverted fullback in the same 3-2-5 shape, but now the profiles are better matched in order to defend against those transitions with Cucurella and Caicedo alongside each other. Key example of this is Liverpool's team in 2019-20, when Jordan Henderson and Fabinho played such an important role in platforming the roles of Salah and Trent Alexander-Arnold, who was able to overlap with freedom because he knew he had the protection behind him of the likes of Henderson and Fabinho. So I largely think the positives of inverting a fullback defensively are far more superior to what we'd gain at the attacking end, because as well, teams, especially against low blocks, teams are showing us outside naturally. And that's what they'll do. That's what a low block aims to do. They aim to cut off central space, and they aim to force you into these areas. So if that's going to be the case anyway, and you want Gusto sort of pinned out here, one-on-one, he's not going to beat his man. So a lot of the time it's going to be recycling football anyway, more so than we even get with, I mean, it's become that with Sancho and Neto anyway. So imagine that to another extent with Gusto, who's not even a natural winger, who's not going to take his man 1v1. The only times that you're going to benefit from this is when he's arriving in that space late, which is something that we've seen against back fives, when, say, Gusto's playing as a right centre-back or Cucurella as a left centre-back. We have seen supportive runs at times, just maybe not as often as people would like, for someone like Madueke or Sancho on the wings. It all depends on the situation. If there's a 1v1, then the right centre back doesn't want to get involved, because the closer they get, they're going to drag another man closer. But if there is a 2v1 already, then this man can sort of push up. He can offer a little bounce pass here. He can often, we've seen that run into this space at times as well, where you can try and clip the ball into here. It's something we've seen. And I do think as the structure becomes more clear, I think the number 8s will get better at doing this with the wingers. I think that's just a synergy thing. And I also think the right centre back or left centre back will become more aggressive with supportive runs when we are like much more solid with the base that we've got in here. So essentially Lavia, Fofana. I think physicality is a massive reason that you're trying to platform this team. So I hope that makes sense. I understand, like I said, there's positives and negatives to pretty much every tactic that you try to play in football. There will always be a positive to overlapping a fullback. There will always be the negatives that come with it. And I do think currently, and this is also, all of this has been with the idea that we've got Jackson. It's even more likely now because you've got Nkunku or somebody having to play up front. I think it's even more important that we don't sort of do the overlapping fullback thing now. Of course, there is the factor that we could do go to a back 5, and I might make a video on that depending how the game goes against Aston Villa, because I do think it's an option. But I think we bring a lot of issues to ourselves, because I will mention it now, but I'll go into more detail about it in the next video. I do think if we was to sit in a more compact team, say that we went to a back 5, we allow teams to come on to us, and we essentially ask them to attack us. I don't think we're strong enough and resolute enough and experienced enough to deal with that, to the point where I don't think it would benefit us. I genuinely think we'd go down quicker, and I think then we'd struggle because we wouldn't have the same attacking firepower in terms of in certain areas of the pitch, because we'd essentially have an extra defender or an extra defensive responsibility. To the point where I think we'd then struggle, and I think we'd end up just having to change it later in the game anyway to chase a result. This isn't to say it wouldn't work at all. Again, it's positives versus negatives. So I want to hear what you guys have to say about that, and I will try and address any concerns and things that you have to say in the next video. So leave your comments down below, as many as you can, as many as you can think of. I'll try to address them, as whether through text or whether through in the comments. I'll either reply or I will try to address it in my next video. Hope this has made a lot of sense to you guys. Thank you for watching. Drop a like if you haven't already. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one.